All right, so hopefully at this point you've set up your SAE as an ownership SAE or entrepreneurship. You have gone through and done your planning, set out a budget for the year, and have started to record your starting inventory. So once you've done that, you can go ahead and start going into financing and journaling. So when it comes to journaling, that's going to stay the same as any other type of journaling. So I'm not going to go over that in this video. Please look at any of my previous ones regarding that. But I will go over financing when it comes to your grain crops enterprise. So we can either choose this 0 right here from our SAE experience page, or we can go to the finances tab. Now, in previous videos, I only covered the paycheck or the non-current manager. At this point, I'd like to cover the other 3 ones that will relate to your SAE. One is the loan manager, for if you take out a loan to help with your operation. One is for non-cash entries, and the other is for cash income and expenses. So the one that all of you will use as an ownership is going to be the cash income and expenses. So once I hit that, I have the option of entering in an income, an expense, or a long expense from entering old data. So ideally you're doing this as you go. So we're going to stick with the cash income and cash expense. Let's start with recording some income. Okay, so I can change the date to say whenever this income was made, who paid that order to me. So let's say, for example, it was the local co-op during a grain sale. I get to choose my experiences. So remember, my ownership one is Callista's Acres, so I can't choose any of my other ones because those are placement. And the system knows that means I only get a paycheck from them. I don't get any type of other income. And so that's why I can't choose any other experience for my example. So for my ownership example of Callista's Acres, I get to choose what type of income it was. So was it from research, products or services, premiums, livestock sales, a government program? Did I do some custom work for someone? Was it an insurance payout? Did I sell any crops or forages? Was it part of a co-op payment? How did I make this money? So let's say, for example, I sold some grain. This would be a crop and forage sale. I would say how much money I made in that sale. And I would say, what was the memo? So if you're doing a crop sale, I would say how many bushels or hundredweight, if that's how your grain is measured. If you are doing a livestock sale, I would say the number of head and how many of those weighed, like the example up here. If you are doing anything like insurance, I would say what was the claim, whether that's the claim number, whether it's for hail damage, something to provide a little bit more background information on what that payment was for, okay? And that's all that memo is meant to be, a small note to clarify why you got this payment, why you made this money, okay? But for this example, I'm saying that I am paid by the co-op on June 6th for forage sales of $5,000, okay? So I'm going to go ahead, clear these lines out because the co-op wouldn't pay me for insurance. It would be through the insurance department of whichever organization I went through. So I have the co-op telling me that for Callista's Acres, selling grain, I made $5,000. So I can save and return, or I can save and enter another, which would just refresh this page. And that's when I could change this to say my crop insurance company. And I could choose my experience, choose cut other insurance, say for the amount, and then say hail damage. Okay. So what that does now is when I look at my transaction list, again, this is showing me all my experiences, so all my SAEs. If I want to look at just one of them, I can choose that filter down here. So maybe just Callista's Acres. And so far, the only things I've entered have been for that grain sale and for hail damage insurance. So it's showing me at a profit of $6,000. Okay. So obviously, I had to do some work prior to getting those bushels prepared to sell. I had to have grown something in order for that hail damage to have done any damage. So let's figure out how we would record those items. So if I'm looking at any expenses I've made, I go back to that finance tab, I hit the cash income and expenses, and go enter cash expense. Again, I can change the date, say who my vendor or payee was, so maybe it's my local seed salesman. And again, I want to make sure that if this is for any reason other than just for this example I'm showing you, I'd be putting an actual business name in there, so that way it's better able to be followed through on your records. I'd make sure I choose my experience. Again, this is my only ownership one, therefore it's the only one that pops up. I get to choose what type of expense it was. So my expenses could go all the way from vet fees all the way to advertising up here up at the top. So what we're going to do is look at what are some things I would have spent money on throughout the year that my local seed salesman would have received the payment for. Okay, so my local seed salesman would have sold me seed. Okay, so I go to seeds and plants. How much money did I buy from him? Maybe I only bought $800 worth of seed, and in this box I would say type of seed and amount of seed. Okay. If I have different types of seeds that I bought from him, like maybe I bought wheat and corn, I would clarify that this was corn, variety, whatever numbers and letters they make up these days. And then I would say the same thing down here. I would do a seed and plants. I would say maybe for $950, and I would say wheat, variety, and its information, and then say amount purchased. Okay, so that's so many bags or so many pounds based on how you're ordering. Okay, so now I'm going to have a record for this date to this person of this amount, and this is the information that made up that amount. Okay, so I can save and return, and now I can see, looking at Just Close Does Acres, that I had a profit of $6,000 for the year, but I've also had an expense of $800 for the year. Okay. When it comes to those finances, okay, so new financial entry, cash entry, expense. There are a lot of different ways you can be spending money, right? You can be spending money for feed, for fertilizer, for gas, insurance, any of those items, and they need to be recorded differently. A big mistake that students make is trying to put them all down here at the same time when they only saying they only paid one person that. Okay, your livestock, fertilizer, gas, all of those should be to the vendor that you wrote the check to. Okay, it should not be paid to just one person. It's going to be to that vendor that you worked with for that. Okay, so that's a big mistake that people tend to make. All right, so now that we know how to make income and how to make expenses, I want to look at this non-cash entries. So non-cash entries, we have several different options here and they are very well explained. Okay, so maybe you were doing a labor exchange. So as part of your SAE, you work in exchange for feed, pen rent, anything like that. So for example, if I'm working on my parents' farm to help cover the cost of land, grain bin space, and their equipment that I use, that's a labor exchange. Okay. If I'm doing a non-SAE labor exchange, that means I'm doing non-SAE related work for that same items. Okay, so SAE labor exchange means I have a different SAE that in exchange for work, I'm getting these items. This is saying I don't have a separate SAE, but I'm still doing some work to get these items. So maybe it's just I'm helping with chores, or I'm working at my parents' bakery to help for this. So though they're not egg related, they can still be used as a labor exchange. Transfer and barter is how you can move items between your SAEs. Okay, so if one part of your SAE is haying and the other part of your SAE is taking care of bottle calves, you can transfer the inventory of hay from your haying operation to your animal operation. Receiving a gift. So this means that no money was exchanged, but you did get a new item. Okay. So let's say, for example, that Dad decides to sell you the old side-by-side so that way you can go chase cows. Okay. Rather than writing a check out, he just gives it to you for your 18th birthday. That would be an example of receiving a gift. You did not have to pay for an item that you received, but it is now currently yours. Okay, so it's your ownership, but you didn't pay for it. Used at home is if you want to record any inventory that was lost for non-SAE related reasons. So for example, if you had some hay bales that, your folks decided to use for a local hay ride. and they just got too beat up afterwards, you couldn't save them to keep with your herd. That's an example of what got used at home, okay? It's an inventoriable item that you lost without a sale. Transfer to non-current assets. So this is something that becomes, instead of being a yearly payment, so something you're going to expect to use or sell by the end of the year, it becomes a long-term part of your operation. That's what this is for. So the example they give here is to transfer a raised heifer into a non-current capital item for a cow-calf operation. So your calves that you plan to sell, you're going to keep some back to maintain and grow your herd. That's an example of it being transitioned to a non-current item, because that heifer is going to become one of the cows that you're calving out, and she's going to be a non-current asset for your operation because she's going to calve every year that you breed her. Okay. And then the last one here is SAE labor exchange for non-current items. Okay, so this is exchange for the land, for the equipment, for the all of those pieces. Okay. The reason that we do an SAE labor exchange and then an SAE labor exchange for non-currents is because non-currents depreciate, and we still need to record that depreciation. However, we're not having to worry with that up here with having to look at seed, fertilizer, etc. that we're getting from Dad. But land, equipment, buildings, that's going to be down here. So let's say with my example that I'm saying that Dad is letting me take care of a couple acres for working on the farm. So I hit SAE labor exchange for non-current items, and I need to say what my income is. So what am I getting from this, and where am I losing something? Okay. So what date is this occurring on, and what is its value? Okay, so if I'm looking at land, and whatever my folks call that land, so maybe we're calling it Johnson's Corner. Description, I'll say number of acres. Maybe I want to include any other features, such as like it's part of a valley, sandy soil. Anything I want to include can go in that description, but it is important to say the size of that. Quantity, again, you're saying how many acres that is. So maybe I'm just doing 10 acres here. And then the salvage value, so an estimated salvage value, and then that is based on the depreciation method. If your land is not something you're going to sell, or like it isn't something that's going to be lost over time, put the lowest percentage you can, so your 20 years, and then have your salvage value be equal to or slightly more so than the value. Especially in the area where I am, land value just keeps going up, and I'm sure it's doing that where you are too, because it's not getting cheaper anywhere. So you're putting whatever your value is and making that the same as your salvage value, because again, we're not planning for a depreciation of the land. Okay. So my area, we're looking at about $5,000 an acre. So $50,000 is what we're looking at in value. I'm assuming it'll be worth at least that in 20 years. And then my options are to either save and journal time skills or cancel. The reason for the save and journal time skills is because of this beautiful box up here. Okay. We are saying that we're getting a labor exchange, but we also need to journal those hours worked to make this labor exchange happen. Like, it wasn't just like we checked a box and now Dad's letting us use land. It's how many hours did you work for Dad so you could use this land. Okay. So we're going to save and journal time skills. If it lets us. There we go. So now it's going to pop up with a journal entry. It's going to keep the date the same, the project the same. We're going to have to add skills, hours, and descriptions. Okay, so for this case, I'm going to say for my operation, I worked for those 10 acres, maybe I put in 150 hours. Okay, description of activity, time was spent fixing, performing maintenance. No, let's change it. Okay, this is for land. So I'm going to say that I spent time clearing trees, rocks, and working Johnson's corner, which is what I'm calling this imaginary piece of land, of 10 acres. I applied blank pounds of lime at a rate of whatever I did. Lime and equipment were part of were rented at a price of 10 hours per 1 hour borrowed. Okay, and so this is how I got permission to take ownership of that land in this scenario. Okay, I was responsible for clearing out that land, fixing it up, getting it worked. Dad let me borrow some equipment and lime to prepare it for seeding. It took me 150 hours to get it to where I wanted it to be, and that is what is going to allow me to use the facilities. So again, this was for plant systems, and I was preparing and managing growing media. So I have a skill, I have a date, I have an experience, I have my hours, and I explain my hours. I'll go ahead and hit save. So what we've gone over so far, we've gone over how to do income and expenses for our operation. We went over how to do non-cash entries. So how did I gain ownership of that land? The last thing we're going to do is go over the loan manager here. Okay, so let me hit new loan. And let's say I'm doing, I have a couple different options. Okay, I have a short-term loan of 1 year. So this is for example, if I just want to get started by buying some seed, or I want to buy a few head of cattle, looking to just do a very low risk loan, a very low amount of worth to it, short-term loan. Capital loan, looking at anything to purchase capital with. So I'm looking for long-term mortgages to be able to purchase large amounts of seed, large amounts of cattle, anything like that. Real estate mortgages or contracts, or like this is for land. This is only land, and then other non-current capital liabilities. So if I am, let's say for example, I do my financing for a new tractor through John Deere. That would be going in here rather than one of these separate ones. Okay. But let's say I'm looking, like I got a loan to help pay for that land instead of doing the labor exchange. Here's how I would do that. I would select real estate mortgages or contracts. I would set the date for when the mortgage was signed. I would say which bank it was that I got my loan through. What is that loan amount for? Again, all of that amount has to be used for the business. Okay. If it is not, then you need to change this amount to equal the 100%. So if actually only half of this is being used to buy land, then I would change my amount to say 25,000 rather than 50. My memo is what it's for. So purchasing of Johnson's Corner from Healy Farms, Inc. Okay, so how many payments am I making per year? If I'm doing one a month, that's the 12 payments a year. How many years am I making those payments for? Oofta. Let's say I'm making those payments for 6 years. Okay, so 6 times 12, 72. So that's how you would fill out for a loan. You hit save. And now we have our loan. Okay, we have our principal amount, the loan amount, how much is being used, all of that information. We know how to do income and expenses. We know how to do non-cash entries. We know how to make a loan, but how do we mark that we're making payments on those loans? So let's go over that next. To make a payment on your loan, you would have hit your loan manager, and then over here you can choose to either edit your information you put in to start or mark your payments. So I'm going to hit payment. I'm going to do a new payment on this. I can do my date, how much did I pay, including interest. So let's say I paid $700 that month. How much of that was interest? Let's say the total amount of interest was $125. Memo, I could just say June payment. And I can distribute that payment across my SAEs. Okay, so because this is all for my ownership, I should be only putting it under my ownership one, and that is what is noted over here too. Okay, so I want my interest to be billed to my entrepreneurship experience, which is only this guy. So this should be 100 right there. Notice that your total must equal 100, and then I hit save. So what it did is it told me that, hey, I paid this much off my principal, and I paid this much on interest. And I can continue to go to my loan manager and see where I'm at on my payments. If I ever finish paying a mortgage or another loan, it would pop up under fully paid over here. However, this one's currently in progress. So now looking at finances, we can see our current assets to our current liabilities compared to cash on hand. So between our land, our loan, and our loan, we are sitting pretty interestingly. But I hope this video helps you guys figure out how to manage those operating expenses as you go when it comes to your ownership or research SAE.